Hello class, I wanted to give you a tutorial on responsive, or also called fluid or flexible web design. And I'll show you some examples, and then I'll show you how you would get started on building something like that in Dreamweaver. Dreamweaver CS6 does have this feature built in, so this won't work for you unless you have Dreamweaver CS6. You'd have to code it by hand if you didn't, which you could do. It's HTML5 specific in Dreamweaver CS6. So responsive web design, so let's check out one of these so you can see what this looks like. Okay, I'll scroll down here and I'll grab one. Okay, this looks nice. Alright, so what happens here is the design looks alright, looks like what we've been working on pretty much. But then when you take this and you downsize it, notice that it actually kind of restructures the page instead of just smashing everything together. So then when you get down, okay, let's say that's what you might see on right there, like on an iPhone. Okay, maybe that's like an iPad, and then here's a laptop. Okay, so really cool way to design. Takes a lot of code, to get something like this done. You can always check out the code and see what they've done with it. But Dreamweaver does give you this a way to develop that. Yours would probably be simpler than this, obviously, but it's a really interesting approach to look at, and it's maybe something you want to move your designs to eventually. It's nothing that you'd have to really, focus on, because as you know, if you design in a screen that's going to fit into a 1024 by 768, if you use the Dreamweaver preset sizes, that's going to look good in most platforms out there, with the exception of maybe a phone. It may be a little bit hard to see that website on a phone, but I mean, you guys know, if you've been looking at sites on phones, they look okay. You just have to zoom in sometimes. This kind of takes that out of the equation. It looks good on everything. So very interesting to check it out. Here's how you do it. If you go to File, New, there's actually an option on here for New Fluid Grid Layout. That's what Dreamweaver calls it, is a fluid grid. You can also do a File, New, and then this actually gives you a little bit better picture of what you're doing here. So if you click Fluid Grid Layout, it gives you some sizes you can play around with, like how much of a percentage of the screen you want it to take up, and column width on a mobile device. This I would usually just recommend default. Also, the document type, to get this working correctly, I think it needs to be HTML5. I could be wrong on that, but it's by default set to HTML5, so I'm thinking that is one of the new features that they've incorporated. So I'll click Create on this, and then we're going to save this. What I'll do is I'll create a new folder, okay, and I'll call it Dreamweaver Fluid Grid. Sounds weird. Okay, and click Create right here, and then I'll go ahead and just save this as styles. So first thing it asks me to do is save a styles.css. Okay, click Save. Alright, and what you're going to see here is basically a simple page. This one looks like it's set up in a phone. Mobile size is down here, so you can see what it's going to look like in the mobile size. Here's a tablet size, and then here's a monitor desktop. Okay, and the desktop again is roughly the 1024 by 768 screen. Okay, so what we want to do here to test this out is I want to drop some images in, kind of like that example site did with their buttons. So let's say that we want to have buttons on here that would resize and restructure based on the size of the monitor. So what I'll do is I'll just put a button on here into this division tag, and then put 4 of them in a row, and then test it so you can see how that works. Now, one thing you want to do is, this is a new feature in CS6, so they give you a lot of hints, which helps out a lot. So this says use insert panel for additional fluid grid layout tags, and all layout division tags must be inserted directly inside the container, inside the grid container. So if you do that, you can go up to insert layout objects, and then you have to make sure you choose fluid grid layout. If you accidentally put in a regular division tag or an AP, it's going to break it and it won't work in the fluid design. So you can put in multiple division tags, they just have to be inside that grid container. I'm really not going to fool with doing a whole design here because I just want to show you how it works. And then what I would recommend is, if it's something that interests you, check out the examples that I posted. There's one on alistapart.com, and then of course the site that I just showed you with all the examples. And then you can also just search for responsive web layout or fluid or flexible design. This is different than a liquid design. Liquid design just stretches out to the entire screen. It doesn't restructure the page when it gets smaller. So this fluid layout does restructure it. Okay, so what I have here, I do have a fluid, let's see, Dreamweaver fluid grid right here, and there's a styles. Let me save this HTML file into that new folder I created. So I created this new folder in my website index and click save. Okay, copy dependent files, they have a boilerplate CSS and then a JavaScript, so you want to click copy. And these are the files that you would have to upload to your server to make this function correctly. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go off screen here, and I'm going to put a button. Let's see, show you what I've got right here. I've got a simple little button. I just created that in Photoshop. It's large so that we can see it working, and I'm just going to take that and drop it into my fluid grid layout. So that actually happens to be inside of the wrong folder, but that's okay. Doesn't really matter. We'll drop it right there. Okay, and then let's get rid of this text, and let's go ahead and just drag and drop this button in here. You can do this with any image you want. Just going to click OK when this pops up. And I'm going to put 4 of these in here. Okay, now my screen again is very small, so my demonstration screen is pretty small, so this may repeat, which is okay. I'll increase this to a little larger size. Okay, just like that. And I do get some side-to-side scrolling just because my demo is so small. Alright, so I got 4 buttons, kind of replicates the look of what you might have on your site with a horizontal menu. Obviously these sites work best if you have a design that's sort of set up horizontally across the page, because that allows it to restructure. I think that's the best looking design anyway. That's the way most sites you see have their layout set up. The one column on the left hand side, not as popular anymore. So I'll do a file preview in browser. Let's just grab Chrome again. Okay, and there's what the site looks like. It's not exactly centered. I'd probably have to go into the CSS to center it. By default, it looks like it's not centered. It does move around a little bit. Okay, and when I get smaller here, you can see what's happening is that it resizes. So that might be what it would look like on a phone, then up to an iPad, and then restructures it. So that's the principle that those example sites use, the fluid grid layout, so that your design resets itself based on the size of the screen. It's something that you want to look at because it involves designing for mobile platforms, which is an important part of web development. We haven't talked too much about that because most of what you do will look good in anything down to like a phone. If it'll still look okay on a phone, but the user's going to have to zoom in, so this would prevent them from having to zoom in. But the sites that you guys have been doing, as long as you stick to these sizes, and I'll stress this one more time, I've mentioned this a number of times, but make sure you're paying attention to this little drop down. This drop down gives you example sizes. If you're not paying attention to that, you're not doing your job as a designer, because you're going to end up with a site that's too little or too big, and it's going to look ridiculous, in a certain size monitor. So this is the one I'm recommending, the 1000 by 620. That's maximized to a 1024 by 768. You might be able to get away with going one larger now, because most every new computer comes out is larger than 1024 by 768, but still, it's the baseline standard right now. It used to be 800 by 600, but don't have to really stick to that anymore. So back to this, again, this is all concerned with the size of the design and what it's going to fit into, whether it's the smartphone, iPhone, or the iPad, laptop, or a desktop, all the way up to the iMac, 27-inch iMac, or your monitor on the Windows side. So that's it for this tutorial. And again, I'll just remind you that you can check out the link to alistapart.com that has the example site, the example tutorials, and then check out the example sites that I showed you here, and then play around with this fluid grid layout in Dreamweaver that you can access by going to File, New, or New Fluid Grid Layout. But if you go to New, you'll see these right here. I'm using HTML5 for everything. I'd recommend you go ahead and upgrade to HTML5. Also, don't forget this. I assume that you've been doing this, but make sure you go back to your code, see what's happening. This has some added in annotations, from the fluid grid layout to help you out a little bit. A lot of this looks like it's done in JavaScript, and then it's probably got a CSS file as well. So lots of things going on with this file. Make sure you're checking out your code. So that's it for this tutorial, introduction to fluid grid layouts in Dreamweaver.